We ready to go?
Give me 1 second.
Just so everybody in the room knows, this is being recorded.
Yes, I do. It's been a while, actually. Most people.
Alex?
I'm like, oh, this guy is going to come with him. I was like, oh, okay.
Before COVID and after COVID.
I think we're Zoom still.
Was this still
We're starting. We're starting. Alex, can we start? Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Anita Rao. I'm Program Director of UF Innovate Pathways, which is one of the units of one of the 4 units of UF Innovate. Thank you all for joining us today. We're launching a new seminar series as a forum for innovators to learn, connect, and gain insights to accelerate ideas towards commercialization. And this is our first seminar. And I'm really excited to have Dr. Jackson Streeter, who is the director of UF Innovate Ventures, talk to us today about reaching a decision to start a new venture. A little bit about what we're going to be doing. Pathways is a program to increase our training and support opportunities for innovators so that we can help you move your technologies forward. Our next seminar is going to be on January 18th. On getting your startup from idea to funding. So please make sure you take a look. It's up online. You can register, and we look forward to seeing you there. Here's a little bit of information on our website and contact information, which I'll put up later on as we at the end as well. But this is a seminar for an hour, so I want to turn it over to Jackson, and I'll let him introduce himself and tell us all about his experiences and how he founded companies and what he looks for in a new venture.
All right. Well, thanks, Anita. It's an honor. Welcome to UF Innovate, everybody here in the room and online. It's great to see some people not on Zoom for a change. So I'm Jackson Streeter. I run UF Innovate Ventures, and Ventures is a venture fund that University of Florida put together and asked me to start 3 years ago. So I got hired here by UF to get this fund started and put together an investment committee of venture capitalists that are sort of scattered around the country to look at the deals that we consider investable. And so the rules for us to invest out of UF Ventures are that any company that we're considering putting money to has to have a licensed technology from University of Florida. Some of those companies are in Florida, and some, we've done 9 deals, and we have a few Florida companies. We have one in Massachusetts and one in California as well. So they can be anywhere, but they have to have a UF licensed technology developed here at UF. So what do we do at UF Innovate? Really, the mission is to inspire you all to create, change, and cure for a better world, right? Really try and do things here that change the world. And we do that, and actually have been pretty good at it. This last year, 2022, the tech licensing office here was ranked the #1 tech licensing office of all public universities in the country, #2 out of all the publics and privates. The Sid Martin Biotech Incubator up in Alachua has won multiple awards, including the Global Incubator of the Year Award 3 times, I believe. So this is a place that really understands the value of innovation. And in fact, it's built into the core principles of UF, right? So these are the 6 core values of the University of Florida. And you can see up there on the top right, discovery and innovation are considered essential to creating a place of excellence here at UF. So when you talk about discovery and innovation and commercialization, what you're really talking about is entrepreneurship. And entrepreneur comes from a French word called entreprendre, okay? I'm sure I messed that pronunciation up, but it means to undertake. And that's when a person realizes her or his ability to establish new business, and that's the key to innovation is entrepreneurs. And that's thanks to entrepreneurs, we have buildings like this that have occurred. And this is Jamie Dimon. Yesterday morning he was on CNBC. He's the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, and I really find him to be very insightful and like listening to what he says, and he had a very wide-ranging interview yesterday. But one of the things he talked about was, how does the United States compare vis-a-vis autocracies like Communist China? And what separates us, in his opinion, is our ability to innovate. And as you can see his quote there, universities here in this country are the core to that innovation. So what we're doing here at UF and other universities, obviously, is the initial driving research that helps us separate from the rest of the world. And in my opinion, I don't think autocracies innovate very well. They copy well, but it really takes Americans and innovation, and the core of that is inside the universities. So some of you may recognize this environment. If not, I labeled it. This is a lab, okay? It's a very controlled place. You try and control variables, do very focused experiments, but what the lab is not is real life, right? Real life is much more diverse, it's messy. And one of the messages the take-home messages are that when you're in the lab and what you're focusing on, I want you to be thinking about real life. How could what you're doing in the lab be used by yourself, by your family, by your friends? Who would be customers for it? Who would pay for it? What's the market need for what you're doing in the lab? Because really, at the end of the day, you really want to do things that have applicability in the real world. So be thinking of that in the lab and think about how it's going to apply to real life. So here are some inconvenient facts about entrepreneurship and startups, right? 90% will fail eventually, okay? That's pretty, kind of a shocking number maybe. I was at Silicon Valley at a conference, and a serial entrepreneur successful in the Valley said, there are no failed companies in Silicon Valley. There is no failure in Silicon Valley. All there is pivots. So when something isn't quite working out, we pivot to the next opportunity, right? And in some respects, that's true. There really is never a failure, because whatever you learned on the first thing they were working on that maybe didn't go exactly as you thought, all the lessons learned from that startup, you can carry on to the next venture. So in that respect, there really are no failures. I won't go through all these, but another thing that kind of struck me here, this is from 2022, is that 75% of all venture capital invested startups fail. So that's a shockingly high number, given that those are professional investors that go through a very extensive vetting and diligence process that we'll talk more about here. So why do companies fail, right? Top reason is no market need for the technology. You develop something, and essentially maybe you get millions of dollars in grants for it, but there's no market need. So that goes back to what I was thinking about when you're in the lab, be thinking about real life. Who are the customers? Who is going to really care about this product? Next is running out of cash. So capital, and we'll talk about raising money in that. And I think running out of cash often happens to do with number one and number two on there, which is no market need, or the team isn't right. There are problems with execution in the team. And we'll talk a little bit about leadership. I'll mention that, some components of that as well. So UF has Carl LePan and his team here at UF Innovate have analyzed within the UF Innovate ecosystem why companies fail, and it's the same thing. It's really no market need, team issues, running out of cash. So those are the same things that we find here. However, sometimes it can work out quite well. This is Robert Cade in the early 60s, saw in the world a need for a solution. And the thing he was looking at was dehydration of the football players in the hot, humid environment here in Gainesville, Florida. And would there be a better way to rehydrate the football team? Clearly there was potentially a need for that. So he went into his lab, and his actual lab and his benches, if you haven't seen it at the Cade Museum, are actually an exhibit at the Cade Museum. I encourage all of you to go there. It's a museum dedicated to invention and innovation. It's a great place. And so I think this is an interesting slide, because you look at the numbers, 23 and 25 there. To this day, the University of Florida gets between $20 and $25 million per year of revenue from Gatorade still. So this is over, 60 years, and that's still paying off. So Gatorade is an amazing success story, but there are multiple stories of inventors and scientists and researchers here at the University of Florida. There's many Teslas in the parking lots here at UF that have been bought through inventions that have occurred here at the university, right? So, and how that works, it's a fairly good thing. As an inventor here at UF, if things are, you don't have to start a company, it can just be licensed out, but whatever royalty revenue is coming back to the university is shared with the inventors of that technology. So, and that's, Anita, correct me if I'm wrong, it's 40% up to the first $500,000 goes to the inventors, and then after that, it's 25% of all the revenue that comes to UF in perpetuity goes back to the named inventors on that technology. So it can be quite worth your while. So I'll talk about myself just here for a little bit. So this is my workplace in 1995, a pretty dynamic environment. This is the USS Abraham Lincoln, and I was a Navy flight surgeon for 8 years. And pretty fortunate, my last job in the Navy, I was the first Navy flight surgeon to be selected on the Top Gun staff, and spent 3 years doing that. And that could be a whole other lecture we'll do one day maybe. But what I want to mention about this is that during that time, one of the things that I did was evaluate new technologies for the Navy, and kind of like what I do now, looking at new technologies. And so one of the problems that we were looking at, one of the needs we had was a better way to treat soft tissue injury. And in a high-G environment in tactical aircraft, cervical neck strain injury is an occupational injury, basically. So we were looking for non-pharmacologic ways to treat that. And I discovered there was infrared laser technology that could stimulate cells, and was being used in a rehab environment. And then I tried to figure out, like, well, how does this technology actually work? And it was kind of hard at that time. But I found some literature from Hungary and Russia that explained that there were wavelengths of infrared energy that could be absorbed by mitochondria and stimulate them to make energy, right? So pretty interesting, and it really wasn't, at this point, completely thought I was going to be 25 years in the Navy, right? Had no concept that I would ever take a completely different path. Unfortunately, a guy who was a mentor of me recently retired from the Navy. He's a former Marine Corps pilot, and then went to med school and became a flight surgeon. Amazing man. Had what's called a wake-up stroke. And a stroke that occurs in the middle of the night is called a wake-up stroke, so you really don't know what time that stroke occurred. And so his wife called 911, they brought him to the hospital, and essentially all he got was supportive care. And what I learned at that point was that over 80% of stroke patients really got no therapy. The drug for breaking up clots at that time had a 3-hour window. So basically got nothing but supportive care, and then within 24 hours he died. So that was, troubling to me. And then I thought about that technology that I was evaluating for cervical neck strain injury, and how I had learned from the literature in Hungary and Russia that it could stimulate mitochondria, had something with energy. And I kind of started thinking, well, maybe that could be applied to stroke. And so that led me to think about something very different. And I saw that as an opportunity, because there was clearly an unmet medical need. So here I was thinking, and then all of a sudden I started thinking, man, there's all these patients not even being treated with anything. This technology that I'm evaluating for this indication potentially could be applied for something completely different. And so that led me, completely naively, by the way, knew nothing about business, right? To think, yeah, this is a big opportunity, and this is sort of in the mid-90s. There's a lot of excitement around, the economy and .com things happening. I thought, yeah, I think I could be an entrepreneur. It's pretty, so I want to learn about it. So I went to this place called Barnes & Noble. Nobody here, none of you young people even know what that place is. And I bought a book on how to write a business plan. So I bought the book, I read through it. Yeah, I think I can do this. Then I'm like, well, this is a medical technology, so I probably ought to learn about that. So I went to the UCSD Law Library and got the Code of Federal Regulations that regulate the FDA, and read about, what does it take to get a medical product through the FDA process and approved. And I thought, I think I understand that, and so I'm gonna go for it. So at this point, I was willing to take a lot of risk. I wasn't married, I could tolerate risk. I just got out of the military and started a company. Now, that's a high-risk scenario, what I did. And it doesn't have to be what everyone does. There are some great serial entrepreneurs in academia that form company after company. And we have one prolific person here from UF in the audience. And people like George Church at Harvard have founded, probably a dozen companies. So they have lower risk. They keep their jobs, but they keep forming companies and go through a process that we'll talk about here in a minute. So I didn't do that. So naively, I thought, hey, this is really straightforward. I'll just go out and raise $5 million, right? And I can get this thing through the FDA, and then some bigger company will be interested and come buy it. Well, so this was the path I thought I was heading down. This is what it really looked like, right? It was very difficult. I learned a lot along the way. It took a lot longer. It eventually had to raise over $120 million in venture money and venture debt. And eventually it worked out, but the pathway was definitely not straightforward or easy. It was uphill and arduous. So we'll talk about, and I realized then I was going to have to raise venture money to get this going. So we'll talk about what do venture capitalists want to see in an investment. So one of the first things that VCs will look at, typically, there are exceptions to this, right? There's corporate venture capitalists that may have different philosophies and whatnot, but in general, we'll talk about what VCs want to see. And the first thing they're going to want to see is that this has a large market opportunity, right? They have to return millions of dollars to their fund. They can't invest in small markets. And by small markets, I don't necessarily mean a small number of customers. It can be a niche market, think gene therapy perhaps, that has a small number of potential patients, but that you can charge up to a few $1 million per treatment. So in that case, it's a large enough market opportunity in terms of dollars. But what they're definitely going to want to see is that there's a large market potential for the technology. And this comes from Harvard Business Review. Basically, this is a scoring sheet for, does anyone want it? This goes back to what I was mentioning earlier. Is there a market need for whatever you're working on? And it gets scored. And this is sort of almost every venture fund will score what the market need for any technology will be. So again, thinking about that from the very beginning is critical. So this is what's sometimes called the venture capital funnel. And in general, venture funds will see sort of like around, let's just say 1,000 deals to fund 10. Okay, so they'll see, they're constantly trying to winnow down to get to the actual deals that they're going to write checks for. So in their mind, venture capital partners and analysts are always looking for reasons to say no so that they can quickly move on and get to the next deal. And what you have to try and do is to proactively try and get through this process to get them to yes. And as part of their process, it's called due diligence. And before checks will be written, you will go through this process. It's extremely thorough, okay? Your major venture capital funds will look at every single thing, including obviously your patents, your market, all the sort of technical things. And then they're also going to be looking at the people and who the people are. And that's probably, I would say, 50% of an investment decision. Who are the scientific founders? Who is the CEO? Who are we going to trust with our money, right? Because they're not going to be the operators of the company. They're going to give you the money, and then you're going to have to execute. So what I would say here is that be very careful not to run into a situation where you violate trust. They are going to look at every single thing. We'll take questions right at the end if you don't mind. They will look at every single thing inside your company. Now, you may have some very proprietary secret sauce, parts of your technology. Those will have to be shared, but probably should be done under a non-disclosure agreement or confidentiality agreement.
Can you just move the sharing screen up to the top? Whoever, just because we can't see your, I think that's your laptop. We can't see the bottom of your laptop.
And it's the most important thing too, right? Yeah. So while they're doing that, I'll just kind of keep going. So I think one last thought on this. if a VC finds something that you're holding back and they discover it, you've lost trust. And there's probably a high likelihood the deal's going to fall apart. So you have to be transparent through this process. So. It takes an engineer, Lawrence, to get these. Thank you. So now, Lawrence, you turned off my slide advance. Okay.
Oh,
Can you
you
turn?
gotta click on that again.
Okay.
No, with the mouse thing, probably. Sorry. I'll fix that too.
All right. Since you broke it, Lawrence, yeah.
Fine. See if it works now. Nope.
Oh, there we go. All right. So starting a company to me, is a lot like building a house, right? The foundation of the house is built upon your intellectual property. Typically, that's always true for life science companies and engineering-based companies. Sometimes not so true for software as a service companies or pure app companies. But for most of the companies that I look at anyway, intellectual property is key. So that's the foundation, right? If the foundation isn't solid, you can't build a house upon it, all right? And so I'll just say a few minutes about intellectual. The worst stories you'll ever hear in your life are where, my grad student presented this poster 2 years ago, and it had all the proprietary things in it that we wanted to start this company around, and now we can't get any patents, all right? That's a tragedy, right? Really great cures for cancer, literally for cancer, were developed at Stanford University, and that exact same thing happened. I mean, that's horrible, right? So you as the investigators out there, really make sure that you're in contact with the licensing office and that you do disclosures to prevent that. UF has, I don't know how many $7 million budget here just for patenting and protecting UF technologies per year. Right? So this university is very active in protecting patents, and you should take advantage of that and prevent, these sort of really horror stories from happening. The other thing, the other part of that foundation is your corporate structure. At foundation of a company, now is when you need experienced legal teams to put the company together correctly. What you don't want is to get involved with your wife's friend's cousin who's a real estate lawyer who thinks they know how to incorporate, and the whole structure is messed up. It's going to have to be fixed later on. Before professional investors will come in and put money into it, they're going to want to see the proper corporate structure, which is typically a Delaware C corporation, although it can be different corporate forms on occasion, but it's going to need to be done right. Because remember, the venture capitalist is looking at 1,000 deals. They're looking for reasons to get to know at the end of the day. So if they've got, they've got enough money for one deal left, they've got two opportunities. One is a corporate mess that's going to need to be fixed, and the other isn't. They're going to go to the place that's easy. So you want to keep making things easy. Get your company started on the right foot from the beginning. It's extremely important. And we've got a bunch of lawyers that UF Innovate we're not recommending them, but that have experience in this area. So sadly, we're in the quarterfinals and US is out, right? We're out of this thing. Before any of these teams got on the pitch and started playing against each other, they did this, right? They went and had these practice rounds. They had the friendlies. And so I would say I highly recommend that you take advantage of some of the programs here at UF Innovate so that you can get in front of friendly audiences before you get in front of professional investor audiences and do friendly practice rounds. Tune up your thing. Get your pitch deck, it's called, which is a 30-minute presentation on PowerPoint, like 20, no more than 30 slides, right? That you've got to explain your opportunity in a very rational, quick way that makes sense to investors. And there's networks of mentors here that can help you get those pitch decks put together. So highly recommend, taking advantage of the resources here. So just a quote, by failing to prepare, you're preparing to fail. And if you get in front of investors too early, it's hard to get that second meeting if the first one didn't go well, right? So you really want to prepare ahead of time to put your best foot forward. So this kind of is how those investors are thinking, right? They're thinking, if I'm an early, so this is the founders there, that stands for founders. And this is kind of, the numbers are sort of general. This is generally how it can kind of look from a seed round of funding with a Series A round, B round, and a C round. and what their positions are going to look like at exit. All right, so look, people get hung up on what's called dilution, and I will take 1% of the Gatorade, shares any day of the week than have 100% of nothing, right? You will be diluted, okay? And what you want to do is be diluted by people that understand your industry and that are going to come in and be value-add investors because they know what business you're in and all that. So you kind of have to accept dilution. And good investors will really want to take care of founders and people that are critical to the operations of the company as this goes forward. So this is kind of what it can sort of typically look like from through different rounds of funding.
Jeff,
Yep.
can you talk a little bit about the ranges?
Yeah, about what?
The ranges, the amount of money that you use around.
Well, it really depends on the business. I mean, it's highly variable, right? Seed rounds are sort of typically, less than $2 million, and Series A rounds, $2 million to $20 million, this sort of range. The last round I did with my company in California was a $50 million Series D financing. So it depends. One thing I will say, though, is that you really want to see from a company point of view that the valuations are appropriate, right? If you raise a seed capital round at some crazy high valuation with a bunch of friends and family, and then you have to reset when real investors show up and have what's called a down round, those can be very difficult conversations to have with people that come in early. So you want to make sure that you don't want to be too low, but you also don't want to be too high, because you want to have, as each round of funding occurs, you really want to have a step up in valuation. So the other thing is you want to raise the right amount of money to meet some sort of milestones that create more value, so that you can continually have those step ups and incremental size of the valuation of the company. So last week, I was in Miami, and aside from being super crazy crowd because of Art Basel, I got to spend some time with Tim Draper, who is sort of see, in venture capital world, this guy's like Michael Jordan, right? He's a very famous venture capitalist in Silicon Valley. And I asked him, like, what do you look for? What is your philosophy of investing? He's been crazy successful. He doesn't always get it right, though, because he was in on the Theranos deal, if you're aware of that. So, anyway, but anyway, it was, I invest in smart, passionate people that are going to change the world, right? That's what he looks for, and that's what he does. He was a very early investor in Tesla. And so there are people out there, great investors like that can kind of see markets even before they happen, even though he got all kinds of criticism, like a car company in Silicon Valley doesn't make any sense, right? But he's kind of having the last laugh on that, I think. There's a lot of resources out there, YouTube, books, all kinds of stuff on venture capital process. I kind of like this Venture Deal book. It's not bad. You can see that one. The Unicorn Within comes from Harvard Business School. It's really about corporate venture, but it has some really great sections on how to inquire with customers what they want and a process for that. So it's kind of a useful guide for figuring out the market. So we'll switch from VCs to angels. You've heard about angel investors. What's that? So this is what an angel should look like. Really beautiful, fits you perfectly. And so from an investor point of view, what's a great angel? Well, if you're starting a orthopedic device company, and a great angel might be someone who's been in that industry, been an executive in that industry, really understands your technology, what it's going to take to get it to market. And those are the kind of angels that are excellent, can be excellent. There are a lot of angel groups now that have combined together to form, like New World Angels in Miami, Tech Coast Angels in California are good examples. They've really banded together and essentially they've become VCs. But there are a lot of individuals out there that you can find, some family offices that may be a great fit for you. There's also these kind of angels, right? And they are out there too. There's this one guy who keeps showing up here in Florida. He doesn't even live in the state, getting involved with deals here, putting in money, and then essentially taking advantage of entrepreneurs that don't know any better, and essentially tying up the company is what he does. And that can become extremely problematic. So diligence is important on your part now, right? So I should have said this for the VCs. due diligence goes both ways. You want to understand who's going to write you a check. So if you're looking at some VC funds, maybe call up some of their portfolio company CEOs and talk entrepreneur to entrepreneur. You might learn a lot about how their experience has been with that fund. Same thing with angel groups. Who else have these angels invested in? Talk to some of the people they've already wrote checks for and get an idea of how they're going to be for you, if it's a good fit or not. So there are some technologies that don't really meet that large market. And this is an excellent place to get money. And Anita is an outstanding resource through UF Pathways to connect you to SBIR and STTR opportunities. And there's at least one company I know that have existed for 10 years here locally, just doing nothing but raising tons of money, like millions of dollars through this process. So it can be a really good way to get non-dilutive funding. If you think, particularly, I think if you don't think you're going to meet what institutional investors are going to want to see. So great source of funding here. So I was lucky. I had 2 exits in California, several here now in Florida. And by exit, what that means is, typically what that means is a larger company comes along and buys a smaller company. So you ought to be thinking about, if I develop this, who are what are called strategics out there that may want to come along and buy this technology ultimately. So that happens a lot in biopharma. And so as best you can, trying to get to know people inside those strategic companies that are relevant to your technology, those relationships can be really important. Because just like for venture investing, a lot of times, things come down to relationships and who are the people. So the more that you can get to know and network within the strategics that may be important to you, I highly recommend you do that whenever you can. So after, sold a company out in California, I had heard about a technology being developed here at the McKnight Brain Institute, developing a blood test for traumatic brain injury and concussion. And this is Tim Tebow in 2009 in University of Kentucky. He got knocked out. And it turns out that there were some researchers at UF who had developed a blood-based biomarker test for concussion and mild TBI. So that was really interesting to me. So I was going to be in Fort Lauderdale, so I thought, well, how far can Gainesville be from Fort Lauderdale? I'll just drive up. So anyway, that was my first real lesson in Florida geography and the turnpike and all that stuff. So anyway, I drove up to Alachua and I thought, God, what can be up here? I thought, this is before, any driving assist apps or Google Maps or anything. I had my MapQuest printed out and I was driving up to Alachua and I thought, this can't be right. But anyway, I ended up at the Sid Martin Biotech Park and I was really impressed by the science that had been done by the scientists here at UF developing this technology, which was 2 proteins that could be detected in the blood that normally shouldn't be there. And so I knew, as a clinician and all that box of, is there a market need for this? Yes, there was a huge market need for a blood test that could check for the presence of brain injury without doing neuroimaging or any of that. So anyway, I won't go through the whole Banyan story, but again, a long, winding road, took several years. But as things work out, we got through the FDA and had a great partnership with Department of Defense. We got about $110 million in total of grants and contract funding from DoD. So when they see a need, and if they jump in as a partner, it's very difficult to get them, depends on what you're doing, but if they really get involved, they can be phenomenally fantastic. So if what you think you're working on has some DoD application, there's an organization called MTech, and I probably should have put a slide on that, but if anybody's interested, I'll send you their contact, that can really help companies connect into DoD because it's sort of hard to do. But if you can get there, it's great. Banyan really got started around 2005, and it took over 10 years to finally get through the FDA. But we made it through the FDA, and then did a commercialization deal with Abbott, and then bioMérieux came along and bought the company. So it worked out fine. So we'll kind of switch that other thing I mentioned, which is leadership. I won't ask anyone to raise their hand, but who here just think to yourself, are you in a position of leadership or not? And I would say everyone here is in a position of leadership, even if you're just a leader of yourself, right? So this becomes very important. Another reason that if you're going through that diligence process, if they don't think that there's a good culture and a good team that's going to execute, again, can be a problem. So I've had, been fortunate to have lots of different leaderships, had bosses with both these different styles. And I can tell you, on the bottom of it, that's a team I want to be on, right? That's a team that I know is going to outperform. I think when teams have these outside egocentric leaders that are very dogmatic, those are the teams that really underperform in my experience. So then there's the opposite of that. I think there's a lot of people that would be great leaders, but they're limiting themselves because of their own ego out of control, or ego, they don't think they can do it. And I think a lot of people could be great leaders, but they have maybe imposter syndrome, where they think they shouldn't do it or something like that, but they could. And so can you learn leadership? Absolutely. There are so many resources out there, and I encourage everyone to think of themselves as a leader. Even people at the lowest level of an organization essentially can be leaders, right? Anyone can be a leader. There's a book here that I really like called Leadership Strategy and Tactics. Maybe I like it because it's written by an ex-Navy guy who was a SEAL, but it gives a lot of really great practical advice on leadership. And so one of the things in there that I really like is a concept called decentralized command. And what that means is giving clear, so everyone in the organization knows what the mission is. If everyone in the organization knows exactly what the mission is, and they're empowered to execute on that mission, you can have force multiplication within an organization. It's just amazing. So they're not all afraid to act, and then, I got to go talk to the boss, and then he tells me what to do, then I act. If they understand the mission, they feel free to act, and they're empowered to act. Can be amazing. So anyway, I like this book. There's a lot of programs here and resources at UF Innovate to help you get through the entrepreneurial process. To capital, to customers, the ecosystem around here, the networking, all of this. And I'll point you, I should have put her email up, but Anita or I can connect you to Jennifer Harrell, who runs a lot of these programs and can point you in the right direction. I-Corps, what an amazing program and resource this is. This is a federal program run by NSF. Anita's got lots of training and connection that she can give to you to how to connect into I-Corps. But here's the data from I-Corps, 2012 to 2020, 5,800 people gone through business training is what this is essentially, and customer, again, going back to that customer, really identifying, is there a need for what you're doing, and getting deep into that. Trained 5,800 people from 1,200 something universities and institutions, resulting in over 1,000 startups, $761 million raised, and 9 exits. So pretty good return on our tax dollars there, I think. This is me at the Van Gogh immersion experience, which if any of you haven't been there, it's in Jacksonville. I think it's still there. I went to this a couple days ago, and man, I was so blown away. I think there's somebody from the art school in this online or something here today. So entrepreneurship isn't just for engineering and medicine and science. I mean, I looked at this and was like, man, here they took all these old pictures, and paintings that sit in museums and present them in such a unique and innovative way that it was like, wow, why didn't I think of that? So I think the point is there's a lot of probably things that are sitting around on shelves that are old that just need to be repackaged in new ways, maybe using AI or imagery and music or whatever. But I think there's, once you start looking at things and think, well, how could I do this differently? It opens your mind up. So the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. And I encourage all of you to go out and change the world. So that's all I got for you. So thank you. I'm happy to take a couple questions, I guess. Is there any online or anybody in the room?
I'm asking you again.
Yes, ma'am.
But none so far.
Okay. Sir.
Building the team, like, I'm talking from, in my case, the scientist that develops technology, but I would need to build a team with someone that knows about business and other people. what's the advice for a scientist looking to build a team?
Yeah, and that is a large part what UF Pathways that Anita runs exists for, and a lot of the folks here at UF Innovate, to connect you as the scientist to mentor networks to help, and then evaluate the patents and the market opportunities. So the contacts that you get from Anita and myself here at UF Pathway to Jennifer would help walk you through that pathway. And sometimes the pathway is that, hey, this really does, there's through the patentability process, for instance, there may be some other IP that's already out there that, stops things. So it doesn't always go forward, but the process of learning about how it goes forward can be applied to the next thing and the next thing. So, yes, sir.
In some of the earlier slides, you put an importance on market validation. How do you recommend entrepreneurs to calculate their total addressable market, and where can you find that data?
Yeah, really good question. So there's what's called the TAM, which is Daniel's asking about. What is the total addressable market? And that really means if I gave this product to 100% of the people who potentially could use it, what is that in terms of the actual market size? So the TAM really means if I had a magic wand to cure broken legs, what is the actual number of people with broken legs throughout the entire world, or all the markets I could get to, and then that's multiplied from what I think I could charge for that product. And so that's what the TAM is. All right, Anita, I will, unless there's any online questions, or yeah.
Can you get a copy of these slides just as a quick reference?
No. No, I'm just kidding. No, I'm just kidding. Of course.
Yeah, the Echo Road, that'd be great.
Yeah, you bet.
We could download it.
Sure, yeah, you bet. No problem. Yeah.
What is UF Innovate's Ventures mission for the next 5 years, and do you have any plans to expand globally?
Well, that's a really interesting question. Good timing for that, because one of the investments we're looking at is a company called Satlantis that has a headquarters in Bilbao, Spain, even though all the satellite imagery technology for that company comes from UF. So it's got an office here in Gainesville and a larger operation in Spain. We're looking at investing. So I guess in that respect, we're going global for the first time, which is kind of cool. So really the mission is to try and enhance wherever that ends up in the world. Like I said earlier, the only rule for us as a fund is that they have to be developing some UF technology ultimately. So that can be anywhere. It's always nice when you're running a fund to show return on investment. And we've done 9 deals. We did have 1 exit. It ended up being pretty good for the university. And so now they think it's easy. So, they don't realize that failure rate I was talking about. But anyway, so yeah, we want to return investment at the end of the day. And we want to make good investments, and we want to change the world. And so how do you change the world? You grow things commercially. So that's kind of our mission. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for your presentation. You were saying that if you want to go to a venture capitalist, you need to have a corporation. But my question is, when you started, did you start with this type of business entity, or maybe with a more flexible, less expensive business entity?
Right. So like forming an LLC and all that. I recommend that if you really think you're going to need to raise venture capital money, just get the corporate structure right in the beginning. Otherwise, you're going to have to convert an LLC into a different corporate format. So that's kind of just makes sense to me. If you're thinking you're going to be running a company that's getting a bunch of SBIR grants forever, there may be some tax reasons you might want to do an LLC. And there are seminars upcoming that explain the differences between S corps, C corps, and LLCs, and there are different tax implications for that. I'm not a tax attorney, so I don't want to give you advice in that respect, but there are some upcoming seminars that really get deep into that. So you bet. Yeah.
If anybody's interested in
Thank you.
move ahead, we're going to have a workshop series to help people, learn the basics of what is needed to set up a company, including what he just mentioned, different corporate structures, start accounting, all of these different types of things, so that you can be ready and at least know what is needed to move forward, whether you're applying for an SBIR grant or, you're developing strategy to actually pitch to a VC, so you can learn the process. So let me know if you're interested.
Sure.
I want to ask a question. So there's so many failures, but how much is that first failure then just a pivot point to something? So what's the data on those that failed that subsequently were successful? Because
Well, that's interesting. I don't, you know, I kind of know some anecdotal stories around that. I don't know that I've seen, you know, successful entrepreneurs and their amount of failures, right? I have seen venture capital funds look at deals they passed on and kind of failed by not investing. But anybody that's a serial entrepreneur is going to get caught up in the failures or pivots. You know, it's just part of it. And that's a cultural thing that's really great about, you know, I think what we're doing here and Silicon Valley for sure, right, is that they accept that, right? I mean, that's a cultural thing. You have to expect that. Now, there are certain cultures maybe in, you know, autocratic, you know, communist countries that really don't accept failure as well as we do. And that's an essential thing that has to be part of the innovation ecosystem is you have to know that a lot of things are not going to go forward as planned on day one. You know, it's like what Mike Tyson said, you know, you got to plan until you get punched in the face and then the plan changes. So, yeah. So.
One of the things he alluded to in the presentation, ICOR, and I know that, you know, Lawrence is very much part of that, and some of the other people in this room have taken the ICOR entrepreneurial training. And that's a good way to go out of the lab and talk to actual people in the marketplace, you know, talk to customers, really figure out whether what you have is a good fit and what is needed. You know, what you need to really, do you need to change a little bit, something a little bit in order to have a solution that would be adopted by people, and how you're actually going to generate revenue. You know, those are the kinds of things that you learn, and it's a really good program which is, you know, well recognized and really, I would say, advocated by the NSF and many of the organizations. And one of the things that, and that's also, I think, become more and more important because when you apply for an SBIR grant, for instance, whether it's NIH or anybody else, any other agency, they're looking for people who know the commercial space. It's more than just the science. The goal is what's your product, and that sort of helps you define, you know, your product. And in the healthcare space, for instance, is that going to be reimbursed? You know, what's the regulatory pathway? Those kinds of things are so important, and you learn a lot of these kinds of things. So keep that in mind. Larry, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I just want to say, yeah, the ICOR program is a great program if you want to go through it and assess whether your technology anybody cares about. Okay, it really focuses you on figuring out what the real need is and does anybody care about it. And I teach an entrepreneurship class in the engineering school, and what you said earlier about failures is the biggest reason companies fail is because they make something that nobody cares about. And it's just that simple. So if you understand that there's a real need for what you're working on, then you have a much better chance of being successful.
Yeah, absolutely. And should
But
get to that
finding
up front.
out
Yeah.
is the first thing you need
Yeah.
to do.
Yes, ma'am.
What is the ideal timing? So when it comes to like medical devices, for example, what is the ideal timing to seek investments? Is it when you have a prototype, when you have research, publications? Like what's the ideal timing?
I mean, I think start with the foundation, right? The intellectual, for a medical device, your intellectual property then is really critical, you know? So getting disclosures done, getting filings done, and then as an inventor, you want to be interacting a lot with the licensing officer that gets assigned to and the patent attorneys they've contracted with that you have to prosecute that patent, because you want to be protecting that as best you can. So once that's done, now you've built the foundation. Now, you know, now you can start thinking about putting together a pitch deck and all that stuff. Because if that foundation isn't solid, if you're not really comfortable with the IP in this example, that's a problem. Even if there's a huge market need, if you can't protect it, it's going to be hard to get people to invest in it. So I would start there. Yeah. All right.
Any other questions? Well, thank you very much for coming here. And like I said earlier, we're going to be running monthly seminars on different topics, either it's topics or people, you know, successful entrepreneurs and innovators so you can learn about their experiences, and it's a great opportunity to get. Some of them will be online, but some of them will be hybrid events. So please come here so you can connect with your peers and people at UF Innovate. So thanks very much, and thank you, Jen.
Yeah, thank you. Hey. Yeah, sure.
So one of the ways, so Elizabeth, my